Okay, let us, having tackled this issue, go on to our next, which is a promise made and a promise kept. Remember that? That was the Conservative campaign slogan in the last election. Well, there's one group out there that thinks the Tories have not kept an important promise: Ontario's disabled community. Its members are waiting for the new bill Mike Harris promised 5 years ago, a bill which would make their lives somewhat more manageable. 5 years and still no new Disabilities Act.
The fountain lets you know where you are and also creates an echo that lets you have a whole sense of the shape of the room.
For David Lepofsky, these sounds are the key to getting into his home, because David Lepofsky is blind. And for years now, he's led the fight to make it easier for all disabled people in Ontario to live their lives.
The Harris government would be willing to enact an Ontario with Disabilities Act in the first term of it.
Lepofsky is part of the Ontarians with Disabilities Act committee. From his command post in his home, he has led the fight for changes in the law that would remove the barriers disabled people face every day. A law that would require things such as these bells that tell blind people when it's safe to cross the street. And those steps leading to the bus or subway, they can be an insurmountable obstacle for a disabled person.
Everyone in Ontario either has a disability or has someone near and dear to them who has a disability, or at some time in their life will get a disability. It's only natural. So the barriers that we face are going to hurt everybody. And the barrier-free society that we're looking for will benefit everybody.
We introduced the Ontarians with Disabilities Act before Christmas, and it died on the order paper. And
the government did introduce an Ontarians with Disabilities Act in the last session, but critics said it was weak and the bill was virtually laughed out of the House. To date, an ODA remains one of the Harris government's unfulfilled promises. The current minister says she's learned from that experience.
I'm going to talk more widely about the whole range of activities that go on with the disabled people in our communities, and I'm certainly going to try and make sure that everybody understands how far-reaching we are when we go there. So I think that I'm going to try and do things differently. There's no question about that.
There's a lot of people out there who are frustrated because they have enormous difficulty getting into an education system that's full of too many barriers, a higher education system that's full of too many barriers and getting way too expensive for anybody. Jobs that they'd love to try to go after, but many barriers in even getting to the workplace.
One of the challenges that we face in setting up the Ontario Disability Support Plan is the whole nature of employment supports, where I don't think enough had been done in the last 10 or 20 years to help people with disabilities move from welfare to work. So one of the things we'll be doing in the coming year is doubling the budget for employment supports substantially to about $35 million.
Groups that work with disabled people to help them find jobs say there are problems with the Ontario Disability Support Program. For instance, the application process to get services like job training can be long and complicated.
The problems that we're seeing are that the clients are falling between the cracks. They're not actually getting to services like ours. The criteria and the processes that have been established with this new program need to be smoothed out so that at this point in time we have an inaccessible system. Clients aren't getting to service.
And joining us now with his thoughts on how we better integrate the disabled into society, David Lepofsky, the man you just met in that background piece. I want to start, if I might, David, just by explaining the surroundings that you're in here. You're blind, as everybody knows. We are sitting at a table that's shaped like a 4, because this is the 4th reading segment of our program. You and I are sort of at the bottom right-hand corner of the 4, and your 3 colleagues are sitting opposite you, sort of on the hypotenuse of the triangle in the 4. How long have you like that?
That's very impressive.
And a square on the hypotenuse is the sum of the other 2 squares.
An Ontario education for you. There you go.
No, a Dublin one, actually.
So you passed math.
How long have you been blind?
I was totally blind in one eye my entire life. The other eye was partially sighted. I was very nearsighted until age 13. My eyesight gradually dropped so that by the time I was in the middle of law school, I couldn't see anything at all.
You've passed law school. You went to Harvard Law.
I went to Osgoode Hall and I did a master's at Harvard Law School.
You studied with Archibald Cox.
That's right. He was my thesis advisor.
He was your thesis advisor, not bad. Wow.
And Gordon Meiklejohn, my husband.
Oh, yes, who is up there with the Watergate Special Prosecutor, yes.
Okay. Meiklejohn Cox.
Yes, they do. Let me ask another seemingly innocuous but I think important question for our viewers to know, and that is, how did you get here today?
Took the subway to work. I worked until it was time to come up here and have somebody slop makeup on my rather receding hairline so you wouldn't be blinded by the light coming off it. And I took a cab up here and somebody met me out front. How'd you get here?
How accessible is it? Well, I drove. It was easy for me, but how accessible is this building for someone like you?
Well, this building's a bit of a maze, but just as one example, when I got on the subway this morning, they were nice enough to announce all the subway stops between my home stop and the one where I get off, except the one where I get off. I had to, and I'm still doing battle with the Toronto Transit Commission, just to get them to keep a commitment to announce subway stops so people who are blind or otherwise can't read print can know what subway stops to get off at. It's just one example of a barrier that we face that's so easy to fix. But under current law, I'd have to go file a human rights complaint and litigate for 5 years to tackle.
And you're not into that?
Well, that's why we want a law that's going to address all of these barriers in a more cost-effective way and that doesn't make each of us have to spend their lives filing human rights complaints every time we run into a barrier.
Mike Harris promised a law last time, as we pointed out. He brought a law forward. Your community didn't like the law. Why not?
He promised that in his first term, he would enact the Ontarians with Disabilities Act, an act we need to achieve a barrier-free society because we face barriers all over the place. The bill he proposed, which was only 3 pages long, did not require a single barrier to be removed anywhere in Ontario ever. You could not do less for us than that bill did, and we thought people with disabilities deserved better.
And you're in the process right now of lobbying this minister and this government again, it's a new minister now, to try to give them a second chance to get it, in your view, right the second time.
That's correct.
Why do you hold out hope that they will get it right the second time?
Well, we are determined to have a strong and effective act passed. We are supported by people from one end of the province to the other, by folks with disabilities, by people, their friends, their families, people who care about them, by mainstream disability service organizations from one end of the province. There is a very, very substantial, united movement that has rallied to get this on the books. Not only that, but we've gone to the legislature not once, not twice, but 3 times and had all 3 parties unanimously support resolutions calling for this act, setting now a 2-year deadline for it to be enacted, stipulating that it should be strong and effective, and spelling out 11 principles that we put forward and rallied around for the act to contain, so that we're using every opportunity we can in the democratic process to both get to people, explain what we need, share our views, and move it forward. The only person who's sort of stuck in the mud on this one is a guy named Mike Harris, the guy who made the promise, the guy who says he keeps all his promises, and the guy who did not enact the Ontarians with Disabilities Act in his first term like he promised he would.
Gina, did the Tories blow it in the first term?
Well, I'm not certain that they blew it. I mean, I have to agree with David that the piece of legislation that was put forward probably didn't have the teeth that it should. But, you know, to be critical of their first go at it, I think is extremely unfair when we know the Liberals who are howling. The best they could do was to bring in sexual orientation, which was supported by all parties.
Okay, hang on, let's stay on topic here, though.
No.
Just a minute. We got to keep it on the topic, though, which is Mike Harris promised and didn't deliver.
And the New Democrats, whose own disabled member brought forward an Ontario Disabilities Act, which didn't even make it to second reading. So this particular government brings in a piece of legislation. It isn't perfect. I have to agree with that.
That is the understatement of the millennium, and it's been a short millennium.
It may be, David, but the fact of the matter is that what you're looking for out of any government is perfection. You're not going to get it. The question is whether or not this government is prepared to go out, do the consultation that's necessary with David's group, and listen to them. Because, I mean, if you don't listen to the people who are the individuals who are the stakeholders, and if you don't listen to the people who can tell you what has to be done...
Is Gina right that your government had an opportunity to do something about this and also blew it?
No, I think she's wrong. Our government, as well as regulatory approaches, looked at non-regulatory issues and things like employment equity, which was in legislation and which was being implemented, and funding for creating a barrier-free environment. governments building housing for the disabled. There were a lot of programs in place in 1995.
Which is exactly what this government is doing
But
as well, Ruth.
Let's
The fact of the matter is,
hang on, Ruth has the floor.
you ignored your disabled members.
Just a second.
Right.
Ruth has the
Look,
floor.
let's not get into that, because you know that our disabled member, Mr. Malkowski, has contested some of the statements that your government has made about his position. But I want to talk about this situation.
Finish your thought, and then David.
You know, Gina talks about the need for consultation, and I'm quite sure that David will tell us that all of his organisation's attempts to have meaningful consultation with this government have come to naught. There's been closed-door consultation with people selected by the ministry. The proposal that was put forward and supported by the Liberals and the New Democrats was for a select committee of the legislature to flesh out the principles that the disabled group have put before the legislature and before all three parties, and the government has refused to do that.
Quick word to David. You obviously were unhappy with the way things went in the last session. There's a new session and a new minister, Helen Johns, whom we saw in the background piece. You've met with her. You like her? Do you have confidence in her?
Well, firstly, the person who's calling the shots is Mike Harris. He promised that he would work with us to develop this law and has refused since taking office to even meet with us. Instead, he sent us now 3 ministers in a row, she's the latest, who come to us, they sit down, they have a nice howdy-doody meeting, and they can't tell us anything. And they don't engage in any meaningful dialogue. She's frankly no different than her predecessors. And what she's doing right now is having a bunch of secret, backdoor, invitation-only meetings with she won't tell us who.
Which, in fact, has opened the door to the Liberals.
Well, but let me just address one thing that just came out from the dialogue, because from the perspective of people with disabilities, and I suspect folks watching this, having a back and forth between the parties is not an intriguing way of solving the barriers we face. But let me tell you, I've been involved in advocating on disability issues for about 20 years now, on and off. And the fact is, all 3 parties historically had a history of moving things forward. The Bill Davis Tory government put disability in protection in the Human Rights Code. The David Peterson Liberals amended and expanded and beefed that up. The Bob Rae NDP put in more barrier removal legislation and more policies to affect this. The Mike Harris government is the first that has turned the clock back, dismantled, cut funding, and really made life considerably worse for people with disabilities. So it isn't a question of history of parties and what went on before. All 3 parties had a great record of moving things forward until 5 years ago when we got a great promise.
Richard needs the floor. He hasn't mentioned anything yet. Your party's doing something on this right now. The minister's not having province-wide hearings on this, so your party's decided to do. A guy named Steve Peters, one of the MPPs, is doing it. Is this done just to embarrass the government, or you really think something's going to come out of this?
Well, parties are in opposition. Obviously, it's done to throw a highlight on this issue. I hope something comes of it. It is, as Ruth points out, it gives the government an opportunity to come at this issue, both via the work that Steve Peters and his Dwight Duncan and the committee are doing, and also through, as Ruth suggests, there is a suggestion in front of the legislature to put this forward by a committee. The committee will study the work with David and people like David to create a better Disability Act. That opportunity is there before them now. If the new minister and the premier wants to find a way to reverse himself on this one, then he has that. I got to say, I appreciate that David's right about that each party has come at it. The one thing I've learned, and David's right, we all have people who are touched by disability in our lives, relatives and friends and so forth. Progress has been made, but once you begin to see life through a person with disabilities, you see how actually little we've done. And
well, let me get to some specifics here. I know you've mentioned
a pox in our houses for not doing enough.
You've mentioned a couple of things already. We hear at some intersections in Toronto that beeping that comes out of the stoplights to indicate when it's okay to walk.
Yeah, the Toronto proceeded with that.
Right. You know, you've already mentioned in subways or buses you'd like the drivers to be able to call out the stops. The stations that you're at, this kind of thing. Give me a handful of other things.
Let me give you a couple examples. If you were deaf and you went to the hospital with a medical emergency, how are you going to communicate with a doctor? The Supreme Court of Canada ordered basically issued a directive that the provinces, including Ontario, have to make sure that if they pay for the hospital, they pay for the doctor, as they do, they got to pay to make sure that there's a sign language interpreter there. They said that 2.5 years ago. The Harris government has not brought itself into full compliance with that and has never answered our inquiries as to when they're going to. Just one example. If you are a person using a wheelchair, you've either got to use paratransit, and you want to go somewhere. If you don't have a car, you either have to use paratransit services, and the funding to them has been reduced, or
just like Wheel-Trans here in Toronto.
like Wheel-Trans here in Toronto, or you'd like the local bus public transit service to replace any old buses that wear out with new ones that are wheelchair accessible.
And many places you're going are not accessible, and even the accessible places are not accessible.
Absolutely. Now, we can't change this all overnight. We need a law. Our proposal is for a law to get us to a barrier-free society in an orderly, cost-effective, sensible way that moves us forward.
Give me another idea.
Another example. If I was in the United States and I went into a major public building, thanks to legislation in the States, I'm likely going to find Braille on the elevator buttons, so I know what buttons to push. If I go to
bank machines.
And if I go to a public building in Canada, in Ontario, I am likely, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, not to find Braille there. It's an easy accommodation to do, but we need this kind of legislative regime to get us there.
Have you thought at all about, it doesn't cost anything more for the driver to name out what subway station you're at, but these other things will cost more money. Have you costed this at all?
There's no sort of instant dollar figure. The government itself commissioned a cost study to find out what the cost implications of the Americans with Disabilities Act has been, which is comparable legislation. In fact, it's the best legislation in the world in this regard. It's got flaws, but it's the best there is. And the government's own study said that the costs on average per accommodation were low, and the benefits were significant. In fact, the Americans signed it into law in 1990. In the pit of a recession, 10 years later, they've created a far more accessible society than we have, and their economy doesn't seem to be suffering from it.
Fair enough, but just give me a ballpark. Sorry, Ruth, we're down to our last 30 seconds here. But what?
Give me a ballpark figure. I think it's going to save money because the effect of it.
That's what I want.
The effect of it is it opens us up for more people with disabilities to get jobs, to get more people with disabilities to get off social assistance, more international tourism.
How much do we have to invest in order to get that dividend paid back ultimately, with more jobs and opportunity for disabled people?
There isn't a specific dollar figure we can give you, and it's not realistic to expect there is, but whatever the cost is, let's spread it out over a time so that it doesn't constitute a burden on anybody, so that it's reasonable.
Fair enough. David Lepofsky, so glad you could be here today with us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Finally today,